Hello there everyone. Today I want to show you how to make this 5-row wraparound bracelet. And this is what it looks like. So you have your button here attaching through a loop. So you just push that through to open it up. And you have your full length bracelet. And push the button back through the loop to fasten it. Like so. So if you want to learn how to make that, then stay tuned. And these are the things that you're going to need. You'll need an assortment of beads. I'm using rounds because I think that looks nice, but you can use other shapes as well, whatever you can think of, and obviously whatever colour combination. I'm using some different gemstones in this case. This is some agate, they're about a 12mm, and I've got some rose quartz, they're about 6mm, and then some black agate here, and that's a 4mm. So you can use whatever sizes you want to use. I just kind of like graduating in sizes. And then some leather cord. It doesn't have to be leather cord, but I just like using that first of all because it looks nice, it's got a nice look to it, but also leather cord is quite substantial, and because it's going to be a fairly big piece that you're going to be making, like a lot of beads on it and that, so you need something that's strong and can hold the piece sturdy. And then you'll need a scissor to cut whatever cording thread you're using, and then the thread. In this case I'm using, this is kind of a form of sewing thread, and it's just in a burgundy colour to match the look that I'm going for. You need to be quite fine because you need to be able to go through your beads several times, and with the needles as well, but at the same time you want to make sure it's strong so when you pull it, it doesn't just break easily. So a fine thread but also quite strong. You can also use something like fishing line or monofilament if you want it to be quite invisible, if that's the look you're going for. That's completely up to you. And then I have a couple of needles here. I like to use 2 needles for this, so I have one on each end of the thread, and then some glue to help finish any ends off and that, and then the button, and I'll be using the button for the fastening. You can use different types of buttons, this is just the one I'll be using. So get your things together and then let's get started. Now the first thing you want to do is cut off a length of your leather cord. There isn't like a specific length for this. All you need to make sure of that, it's going to obviously be long enough to go around your wrist and then have excess so you have enough to work with. And remember, it needs to be doubled over. This particular length is about 75 centimeters, but it can differ, obviously also depending on how large you need it to be. But cut off a length of your leather cord, and then I'm working on my macrame board in this case. It has these little notches, so I'm going to be using that. I fold my cord over in half, and then it creates this little loop around the middle, and all I do is that loop I attach to my macrame board around one notch basically. So it's attached, and you also have where the center is. And then you also go down to the bottom and attach your ends at the bottom, and again one on each side, so your whole cord is separated out with space in the middle. Now what you need to do is cut a length of your thread that you're going to be working with. You need to cut a fairly long length of this. The first one doesn't need to be as long, but once you start on the outer rows they need to be a lot longer. The reason for this is it's just better to try and do it in one continuous length rather than having to add in thread. So just really as long as you can bear to work with. And then on each end of that thread I've threaded on a needle. Just any type of regular needle, that'll obviously go through your beads. So you now need to start adding in your beads. And to do this, I get one bead out, and this is the beads that you want in the middle of your bracelet. I usually like to have the bigger ones in there, but again, it's completely up to you, your design. And you put that bead on one needle, feed one needle through it to get it on your thread, And then I grab a hold of both needles and then just get my bead down to about the middle of the thread. It doesn't have to be precise, but just roughly. And then I take one needle again, feed that underneath my 2 cords, because you now need to have your bead placed in between your 2 cords. So just keep hold of your bead on the thread so it stays roughly in the middle, and then place it underneath, and you now have the first bead in place. Now what you want to do is secure this bead so it doesn't move around. To do that, you want to grab both your needles again. The way it's lying now, you have your bead in the middle in between the 2 cords, and then you have your thread coming out from each side but underneath your cords. So you then take, I always start with one side first, it doesn't matter which one you start with. Take one needle, put it back through your bead above the cord, so your thread is basically looping around the cord. Pull that all the way through, tight, and then you grab the needle from the other side. Again, the thread is still coming out underneath your cord, so you go back through the bead above the cord and just pull that thread through. Like so, and you can then pull it tight. Now what I always like to do, because this is the first bead, I like to basically double secure it. So I always like to go through it another time with my threads. So at this moment, the threads are again coming out above the cords. That's just usually how it works out naturally. So to get into position to go back through the bead again, I take it down through the middle, my needle, and then back out to the same side. Do the same with the other side. This is just to get into position to put the threads through the same way that we just did. Just to keep it uniform. Like so. So your threads are now back to coming out underneath your cord. And then you do exactly the same thing. Do one side first. Get your needle. Go above your cord, so you're looping around your cord with your thread, and put it back through the bead. And pull it all the way through. Take the thread from the other side with your needle on, back through the bead, and pull it all the way through, like so. So your bead is now on there pretty securely because you've gone through it twice and looped around your cord. Obviously it's a bit far down, so before you get too much further, I just like to push it up to sit where it needs to sit, basically. And you can still adjust it a bit. I'm going to look at it again when I've added a few more beads, because you need to check that your loop fits the button that you've chosen. So I now want to add my next bead. To do that, I need to get my threads into position to do that. So I take one side first. Again, from what we did previously, the thread is coming out above the cords. What you do now is you go underneath the outer cord and come up through the middle. This is what you need to do to get into position to add a bead. And the same with the other side. Underneath the cord from the outside and up through the middle, and then out to the same side, like so. Then now I'm in position to add the next bead. To do that, you want to get out your next bead. I'm using the same one, same type, and I start with one side, grab one needle, and then feed your bead onto that. Pull it down a little bit, not all the way. and just keep hold of your bead like so. And this is the end, this side is where my end is coming out. So you now grab your needle and thread from the other side and you go back through the bead but the opposite way. So it's like putting your needles through, facing each other, going against each other really. And all you do now is grab a hold of those ends and then you pull tight. And then that will make your bead sit just right in between your cords underneath the other one. So again, we want to secure this bead in place so it's extra secure and won't move around. So we do the same thing that we did before with the other bead. We want to go back through it again. So your threads are coming out above your cords. So you need to go down through the middle and out to the same side. And just pull all your thread that way. Do the same thing with the other side. So down through the middle, in between the cords, and then pull out to the same side. Because you're then in position to go back through your bead. And to do that, again your threads are now coming out underneath the cords. You do one side at a time, grab your needle, above your cord, and go through the bead. And then just pull all the thread through. And you can always tighten it up once you've gotten both your threads through. Same thing with the other side, above your cord and through the needle. And then pull it all through. And the most difficult part will be in the beginning, especially because you have so much cord that you're working with. So much thread, sorry. But as you go it'll get easier and obviously your thread will get shorter and shorter. So that's now your second bead attached, and every time you attach it and before you move on to the next one you want to make sure that it's nice and tight so there's no loose threads along the way. Because once you say gotten further down and you tighten them all, if you find out there's a bit of loose thread here you can't really do anything about it other than undoing it all, and obviously it'd be ideal to avoid that. So now you need to get into position to add the next bead. So we have both our threads coming out above the cords, and to add the bead, to get into position to that, like we did before, we go underneath the cord and pull it up through the middle and then back out to the same side. Same thing with the other side, underneath from the side and up through the middle, and just pull it like so. And now you're ready to add your next bead. So you get your bead, put it on one side first, pull it down a bit, and get the needle from the other side and put that through the opposite way, like so. And then you grab hold of both ends again and pull tight, like so, and your bead sits right underneath the other one. So we've now added the third bead, and what we need to do is go back through again to secure that in place. So one side at a time, thread is again coming out above the cord, so you go down through the middle and pull it out to the same side. Same thing with the other side, down through the middle and out to the same side, just to get into position to go back through your bead, like so. And then one side at a time, above your cord, put your needle through your bead, put all your thread through, like so. Take the other side, above your cord and pull it through. And like I said, it doesn't matter what side you do first, because you'll do them both anyway, and it just has no effect on it really. It's going to end up being the same and then you pull tight, and now your bead sits nicely there underneath the other ones. And I'm going to show you one more time how to add the bead. So you have your threads coming out above, that one is secured in place. So you now want to put your threads into position again where you add the next bead. So they're coming out above your cords, put it underneath one cord and pull it up through the middle. Same thing with the other side. Underneath one cord and pull it up through the middle. And then you grab your next bead, put it on one side, feed one needle through it, pull it down a bit, and then put the needle from the other side through it the opposite way. Then grab your ends and just pull it tight, like so. Now what I will just recommend at this stage, you've added a few beads now and they're pushed right to the top. Obviously if you don't have the macrame board, you just have a different way of fastening it. But if you do have it and you're working with it, I just want to tell you, before you get too much further, it'll be a good time to check your loop against your button to see if it fits, or if you need to adjust anything, because you'll want to do it kind of now. So what you need to do is make sure that your button will go through the loop fairly easily, but also when it's through, that the loop isn't too big, because the button obviously needs to be able to hold your bracelet. So this is pretty good size really. Because what you could do if it wasn't, you could always push your beads up a little bit or even down if you needed to. So I recommend you just check that before you get too much further. And then you fasten it again, reattach it. And then you just keep working with it. Keep adding your beads until you reach the length that you need your center to be. So I've now added in my last bead and I've reached the length that I want my bracelet to be. Now it's also at this point, as you're getting towards the end, as you're adding more and more beads, that's when you want to kind of start measuring how long you want your bracelet to be. Now the way you do this, obviously you need to take into account that you have the loop at the top and then you're going to put a button at the other end. The thing is, the button's going to go through that loop, that's the fastening. So you don't want to measure the full length from the top of the loop down to below the button, because that just won't make sense. What you need to do is account for the overlap. So what I normally do is I place my button right below the last bead, and then I get my measuring tape out and I measure from the top bead down to below the button. So that is pretty much 7.5 inches, and that is going to be the length of my bracelet. You could also instead measure from the top of the loop to the bottom bead, either way, but just because it's fastened to the board, I just do it this way. So it's just, remember to take into account that you don't want to measure the full length of the bracelet because you need to account for that overlap. So that's how you measure it. So I've reached the final bead and I would now be in a position where I need to get my threads into position to add the next bead. Obviously instead of doing that, you want to finish off your thread so you can then start working on your other rows. To do that, all I do is, because it's the last bead, I want to do the same as the first bead. I want to go through it a couple of times just to extra secure it. Because especially at the ends, you got to remember this end, the button will be, and that end is where the loop is. And it'll get a lot of movement and a lot of, obviously, having the button going in and out and stuff. So you want to make sure that the ends are extra secure. So I just go back down through the middle, pull to the side with both threads, and this is just to get into position to go back through the bead again. Pull it tight, and then just like we've been doing the whole time, your thread will be looping around your cord. Put it back through your bead, and pull it all the thread through. Same with the other side, and pull it all the way through, and then just tighten it. Now I want to do this a couple of times, but in between doing it I want to just tie off my thread as well. I don't want to just say make a knot now and then cut off the thread, because chances are it's more likely to come undone that way. So what I like to do is basically make a knot on each side now. So my thread is coming out above. I go down underneath and pull up through the middle. And before I pull the thread completely, I go back through the loop that I've created once and twice, like so. And then I pull the thread tight. Like so. So the knot is going to be basically looped around your cord and it'll be sat right where your other threads are. You do the same thing with the other side. Go around your cord and then through the loop twice. This is just how I like to do it. I like to make sure that when I make things they're as secure as possible, especially if you're selling things. You want to make sure that the chance of something breaking is as small as possible, really. Like so. And I do like to just, at this point, just put a little tiny bit of glue on. So just right on the thread where the knot is, only a very little bit, because we haven't quite finished it off yet. It's just to hold them knots in place. And for this kind of work, and a lot of jewellery work really, I like using a glue that's called Hypo cement. It's first of all a really good glue. It's really nice and strong. It's got a good consistency. But then it has a really nice and fine tip, which means you can really get into places and do fine detail work. And then also it dries clear, which obviously you want it to. So your threads are now in this position. I want to go back through again and just, it doesn't really matter now what way you do it. Just make sure that your thread loops around your cord before you go through. Now at this point it can start being a little bit more difficult to get your needles through. Obviously you can, the more threads are in there space-wise, but these beads are quite big holes because they're big beads, so that's not really the issue. It's because you have your cords running along the sides, basically covering the holes of the beads. So that's just why it's just a little bit of maneuver work, but it'll get through. Like so, and pull tight. And now I want to do the same thing again around the cord and through the loop, because I want to now make another knot on each side. Go through the loop twice and pull that tight and push it up so it lays right next to the other threads, so it all blends in and it won't be visible. Underneath, up through the middle, in this case, through your loop twice, and pull it tight and get it into position, like so. And again, to finish off them knots, make sure they're nice and tight, I just go over it again with my glue. Just a little bit, you don't want to put too much on, just enough to hold your threads. On both sides. Like so. And basically now this row, the middle row, is done. And what you can do now, obviously you want to let the glue dry, You can cut off these threads if you want to, if you feel like they're going to be in the way, but I like to kind of leave them on for now because I don't know, I might want to use them a bit later on, maybe at the end to attach the button or something. So I'm just going to leave them on for now when we start on the next row. Now the next thing you want to do is start working on your next row. So you finished off this row, either you cut off the threads or you just put them down with your cords out of the way. So what you need is to cut off another length of leather. This just roughly about the same length as the first one you cut, maybe just a tiny bit longer, because obviously it'll go around a bit further. And then all you do is, if you're using the macrame board, again, just use the notches. If not, just find another way of attaching it. So what you do is, I start down here because this is where my ends are from the previous row, and just to get the ends roughly the same, I put my leather in the very next notch and my ends underneath are about the same length. Put that back down, move up to the top, and then I fasten this in the next notch at the top of the board. And now we're ready to start off the next row. So to start off your next row, you have your cord in place, and now you want to get out your first bead. In this case I'm using the rose quartz, the 6mm ones. I've already put it on my thread, and I've also got the needles on the ends of my thread. And again, just like before, you need as long a length as you can bear to work with, really. If you don't have enough to complete the whole thing, you can add in, but if you can avoid it, that would be best. So I put the bead to roughly about the middle of my thread. So I now want to get that placed in the right way. So I put my needle underneath my two cords, just like we did in the other row, because this is the first bead we're going to start off with. And pull the end through. Keep hold of my bead so it stays in about the center of the cord, just roughly. And you now have your bead placed in between your cords with your thread coming out on both sides underneath the cord. So as you might be able to tell, on this row I'm starting from the bottom, where on the previous one I started at the top. It doesn't matter in the sense that you end up with the same result because you need to work your way all around. But if you feel more comfortable, you can just flip the board around or flip around whatever you're working on. So you're still starting from the top. That's completely up to you. But again, this is the first bead, and because it's the first one, we want to extra secure this. So again, my thread is coming out underneath the cord, so I want to go back through the bead above the cord so the thread loops around the cord, and pull that through. The same thing with the thread on the other side. Go through the opposite way. And again, the first one's always going to be the most difficult one to put on because it's the most fiddly, and kind of because it moves around and that. Like so. So the bead is now on there and it's secure on the cords. But again, like before, because it's the first one, I like going through it again just to extra secure it. So your threads are coming out above the cords. I want to go down through the middle and back out to the side. And the same thing with the other side. Just to get into position to go back through the bead. Now you might find this a little bit more difficult, not technique wise, but because you're now working next to this row and because you have more cords and you have leftover threads if you haven't cut them off. It might look a bit more messy in that, but just try and focus just on these two cords and just the fact that you're adding beads in between here, just as if you were doing on the very first row. The only difference is this card is free, but the other one has got beads on it. But all you do is work in between the beads. So the thread is now in position, so I want to go back through the bead again. Like so. And the other side as well. And then pull it tight. If you need to, push up as far as it'll go, so it sits either right next to or right below the big bead in the middle, like so. And I'm now happy with that, and now I want to get my threads into position to add another bead. So to do that, we do exactly the same thing as we did on this row. It just might seem a bit different just because we're working in a different direction. All you can try and remember is when you need to go back through the bead, you need to go down through the middle and out to the side. And when you need to add another bead, you need to go around the side and up through the middle. So if you can, just try and remember it that way, and it should work regardless of what direction you're going. So I grab one side first to get my thread into position. On this side, all you really do that's different is you just want to, it's all really as you go, you figure out where you want to put your thread, where you want to put your needle, just so it fits in between your beads really. That's all, the only difference there is to it. So I want to go around this cord and up through the middle. Same thing with the other side. The exact same thing as we were doing before when we added bead on this one. So around and up through the middle. And now your threads are both coming out through the middle like this, which means we're now ready to add the next bead. And to do that, just like we were doing before, you get your bead, get one end of your thread where the needle is, put that through the bead, pull it down a bit, get the other needle from the other thread, put it through your bead but the opposite way, and pull that through, and then grab hold of your ends and pull that tight, and it'll sit right, in this case, above the other bead, whereas before it was below. It's just because we're working in a different direction. And now we want to go back through that bead again. So like I said, then you need to go down through the middle and out to the side. And as you can probably tell now, my needle will now be coming through that side, but in between these two beads. That's just because that's the point I've reached now, where that's where it's going to fit best. But that's all relative, it all depends on what you use obviously. It's just you work it out as you go. Like so. And now I want to go back through. So you're looping around your cord with your thread, going back through your bead. That's one. Same thing with the other side. Through the bead. And then pull everything through and tight. Like so. So that now sits right close to the other one, the first one you added. And all you do is continue. Now I need to add your next bead. So again, as you can see on this side, I need to go down in between these two beads to then go underneath the cord and up through the middle of the cords. Back out to the side. And on this one, it's just wherever, because there's no beads on here. Like so, and your cords and threads are now in position to add the next bead. Again, Start with one side and then put the other needle through the opposite way. And then grab both ends and pull it tight, like so. And again, you now need to go back through. So back down through the middle and out the side. Again, I'm still in position to be in between these two beads. That will probably change with the next bead that I add. I'll be going in between the next two. And then back through this bead to secure this in place. Same thing with the other side. And then pull it tight, like so. And that's all you do, you just continue like that. Get ready to add the next bead. Like so. And just continue all the way around. And then I'll show you what to do next. Now I've reached basically to the top of this side, and I've basically reached the point where my loop starts. And obviously I can't continue right now because it's attached to my board. What you can do now is then, if you have a board or if you're using anything else, you can take it off, and it's not going to go anywhere because you have so many beads on now and threaded around so many times that it's nice and secure. So you can take your bracelet off your board and you can basically start working with it loose now. Because now we've worked our way all the way up from the bottom and up to basically the top. And now my loop starts here. There's nothing different about it. It's basically just going back to having two free sides. You just continue in the exact same way. You can either work with it loose or use a board, use pins or something to pin it down if you want to make sure it's fastened securely. I've added that bead, and all I do is just continue all the way around the loop part. Add my next bead. Exact same thing that we've been doing the whole time. Like so. Tighten it and it'll fall into place again. I'm going to go back through the bead, so get your threads into position. Start with one side. Again, doesn't matter which side you start with, you'll be doing both anyway. Like so. And pull that tight. And again, get into position to add a new bead. Pull it down and it sits right there. And this is all you do, and as you go it will naturally curve around your loop, and you just move it around, continue, and then continue back down the other side as well until you end up down here, same place where you started on this side. The only thing I will say, like I said, if you can, try and avoid having to add in thread. So work with as much as you can. If it's not possible, if you run out somewhere, you can tell your thread is not going to be long enough. One little thing I will say, Well, it is possible to add in. All you do is, the way we tied it off down here in the middle row with the big beads, you just do like that. You choose somewhere, choose the bead, make sure you have enough thread left to work with. You don't want to have tiny little ends left. So go through it a few times, make a couple of knots at a time and glue it off. And then once it's dry, let the glue dry, and then you want to cut off that thread right close down to the bead and make sure it's secure. And then all you do is to add the next bead, you start like you would start a new row and just make sure it's pushed up right below the previous bead. That's how you add a new thread if you need to. What I will say is try and avoid doing it up in the loop area. If you can, either do it on this side. If you can tell you're running out, you're not going to have enough to come over here, or if you come over here on this side and you're running out, try and do it, because if you do it in the loop area, it'll be more obvious that you tied it off and added new thread in and you glued it and that. If you do it on the sides, it'll blend in a bit more. So it's just a nice little finishing touch. So continue with your whole row until you reach this part down here, and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now finished off this row of my beads, come all the way around and finished off here, tied a few knots and put some glue on. And then now I want to make the last row. You can stop at this point if you want to, that's completely up to you, your design. But if you want to add another row of beads, then you just basically do exactly the same thing that you did with this row. So I've placed another piece of leather cord on the side of my bracelet, and I'm still using the board, and I'm just using the notches just to keep it a bit secure. It'll make it easier to work with. The length of the leather cord, just a little bit longer than the other lengths really, so they kind of match up at the end, just roughly. And then I've already gotten my thread ready. I've got quite a long length because you kind of need even more length on this one, because this will be your longest row going around. And I've already threaded on my 2 needles, one on each end. And then I've put on my bead, and then I'll get 1 needle, put it underneath the 2 outer cords, like so. Grab them both to get my bead in place in between these 2 cords. So I now have my bead in place where I want it to lie, and we're just doing the exact same thing as we were doing with the previous row. So my threads are coming out from each side of the bead underneath my 2 cords, and I want to now go back through the bead 1 needle at a time. To secure this in place, and then the other side. And then just grab the ends, get it in place where you want it to go, and then pull tight, and this is where my bead is going to sit. And then like before, because this is the first bead, I like to go through it again. So I'm just going to get my needles and thread into position to go through the bead again. I'm going to take them down through the center, in between the cords, and out to the same side. And then go back through. One side, get the other side, And now I've kind of reached a point where it's quite hard for me to get a needle through the bead, and that's because obviously my bead is quite small, and so the drill hole is quite small. That's why you want to make sure that you have your needles and needles that will go through your bead, but also your thread not to be too thick, because the more times you go through, the more space the thread will take up, of course. So now, because this last go through the bead is quite tough, what I often find help is if you get a pair of flat nose pliers out and grab your needle with them, because you can get a much better grip on the needle than just using your hands, and you can most of the time actually get it through that way, like so. And then you just get your threads. Make sure you avoid knots and stuff, and pull it all through nice and tight. Push it up where it needs to go and pull everything tight, like so. So again, now it's time to just add the next bead. So we continue like we've been doing the whole time. Get your threads into position by going around and coming up through the middle. Same with the other side. And then you grab a bead, put it on one needle first, pull it through a bit, and then feed the other needle through the opposite way. And then just grab your ends and pull that down nice and tight. And then your bead sits there just above the other one. So we're doing exactly the same thing that we've been doing throughout. Now I'm in position, need to get into a position to go back through the bead again, and then I just continue like this all the way around till I end up on this side, just like we did with the previous row. So just continue doing that until you reach that point, and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now finished off my very last row, gone all the way around and tied off my threads at the bottom. So all that's really left to do now is attach whatever button it is that you'll be using. Now I've left all my threads on at the end every time I finished off a row, and like I said earlier, it was just because I want to keep them there in case I want to use them at the end to attach the button. Because really there is no specific way to attach the button, because it's very dependent on the materials that you're going to use, and obviously what button you use as well. The button that I'm using is a flat button like this, and then it has just one loop at the back. And obviously the loop that is on the button obviously determines what you can get through. And bear in mind, this is 2mm leather cord, so it's going to be limited. You won't be able to get all these through, so you have to figure out a way of doing that. So that's why it can be different from bracelet to bracelet, really, how you need to finish it off, all depending on the materials and the button you use. I've decided actually that I'm not going to be using these threads to finish it off. So what I'm going to do is actually just cut them all off, because I've tied them all off and glued them, so I can just cut them off now and the glue is dry. Like so, and it's now ready to be able to just attach the button. Now the only thing I will say when you're finishing it off and attaching a button, be careful not to just tie too many knots on top of each other, really, because you don't want the part underneath the button to be too bulky, because that'll be against the back of your wrist or anywhere else in your wrist, and obviously you don't want it to be uncomfortable to wear. So try and make it as flat and as nice as you can possibly. So I've decided what I'm going to do is actually use some square knots to finish this off. So my two middle cords are going to just be my holding cords. So I'm going to take the next two, the middle one from each side, and just do a simple square knot around the two middle ones, like so, and just pull that up there. Don't pull really tight because you don't want the actual bracelet to lose its shape or anything. And then the other half of it. And then pull that up there. And then tighten it so it sits nicely. Make sure it's not pulling it out of shape or anything. That's all nice and flat. But tighten the knot so it's nice and secure. Now what you need to do, because this is leather cord, the knot itself won't hold that well unless you help it along really. So to that I'm going to use some glue, and I'm just going to use some Hypo cement for this because the tip on this is quite strong glue and it dries clear, so it'll help make it not visible and all that. But the tip is really fine, so it's really good for getting right into the well and getting right into all the cords to cover where you need to cover to make it as secure as possible. So I'm just going to make sure it's nice and tight, just how I want it to be, and then I'm just going to put glue in the well that's been created from the knot. Make sure to tie all the knots together. And just around where you feel it's necessary really to help hold it tight. And you can put a bit around the sides as well. It's just to make sure none of the cords are going to be able to pull out. Like so, and then I'll do the same on the other side. Because you certainly don't want this to come undone after you've done all this hard work to finish it off. Make it as secure as possible. So just put a nice amount of glue, because it is leather cord, so it's a bit different than working with some other type of cord or thread that's quite fine. This is quite substantial, this. Like so, and then obviously just leave that to dry, and then I'll show you what to do next. So I made my first square knot and I filled it with glue and let it dry. And before you cut the cords off, you want to make sure that they're not going to go anywhere. So I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do is get a scissor out and then cut off the excess cord. On both sides. So you want to make sure that the cord isn't going to go anywhere now, because you don't want them to slide out. Like so. So now that my first knot is in place and I've got rid of the excess cord, and now I want to get my button and put that on. So what I'm going to do is the two middle cords, basically what I'm using as holding cords, I'm going to put them through my button, because I know for this button two of my cords will go through it. I'm not able to get 3 through, so 2 is my maximum for this. It's a bit of a tight squeeze, but they do go. Like so. And then just keep hold of your cords and push your button up in place. Like so. And if you're happy, then that's where your button's going to sit. I'll show you on the other side. So you push it up right to below the knot. And then what you do now is you want to use your two outermost cords to then form a square knot underneath the button to basically trap the button in place. So you just do exactly the same as before. Put one cord over your two holding cords, the other one over that, around, underneath your two holding cords, and pull up through the loop. And then pull that tight. Again, be careful when you're pulling it. You don't want to pull it so tight that you're pulling your bracelet out of shape, like that would be. So just do it gently until you find the place where you feel like that looks nice. And then do the other half of the square knot. Same thing, just the opposite way. And then pull that tight. So you have a complete square knot underneath your button. Make sure everything's in place and sits the way you want it to sit. Because you can just adjust it a little bit. You want to do that now before you completely glue it off and finish it off. Like so. And then on the back you have your second square knot underneath the first one and the button in between. And then all you do again is you get your glue out and do exactly the same as before. Fill up the well, fill around your loose ends and stuff to make sure the knot sits very nice and tight and it's not going to come undone once you cut off the excess. So glue that in place and then the bracelet is near enough finished. So I've now let the glue on my last knot dry and all that's left to do is cut off the ends. So again, I'm just going to get my scissors out and then you can flip it around as well if you need to, if that's easier. You just want to grab this end that you've glued off and cut it as close as you can to your knot. And because you've glued it all together, it shouldn't come undone. And you let the glue dry. And the other one, get your scissor in there, cut it. And then I also want to just cut off these two ends. Like so. And what you can do is once you've cut them, you can always go over the ends a little bit again with your glue just to seal it all in place. But then that should hold. And then this is your finished bracelet. So your bracelet is now finished and ready to wear. And then all you do to fasten it is get your button through the loop and it holds like this. So this is your finished bracelet. So I hope you enjoyed that and thank you for watching.